Deputy Orr Murphy, 25 minutes.
Thank you, Professor. You're very welcome. I just want to continue with Anglo, if I may, for a moment. When you came in September 2009 and became governor of the central bank, how significant was Anglo for you coming in? I mean, was it the majority of your work, or was it just another piece of the puzzle that you had to solve?
Well, not on a day-to-day basis, not as if it took all the time, but it was it was evidently a very big problem. It was, in my mind, it was always going to be the bulk of the losses. And those losses were, in my mind, a lot bigger than most people believed. So I thought this was going to be the real driver of losses, and that there were going to be losses in the other banks too that might force them into full state ownership, but that the big shortfall would be on Anglo.
The starting position was the PwC analysis at the end of 2008.
No, I didn't rely on the PwC analysis in broad terms of where is this all going. I was PwC weren't looking at the residential loan book. They weren't looking at the small business lending. They weren't looking at, they were primarily looking at, as far as I can remember now, at the big business, the big property loans.
You came in September. I think the first 4 billion had just been provided to Anglo in terms of a capital between June and September. So what did you do? The banks just received this money. I mean, off the back of that capitalisation, then do you go in and do another loan analysis or a first time, quality of the asset? Or
the first thing I did in this space was to say we need to think now towards the recapitalisation of the banks, which will follow from NAMA. I set up a team to prepare, not just looking at the loan losses of some parts of their book, but looking forward to recapitalisation needs. And eventually the date decided was March 2010, but even in, I guess, October or November of 2009, it set up a team mandated to arrive at, from looking at all of the loan book and the rest of what the banks had, because they had assets like the Polish subsidiary and so forth that could be netted off, could be sold and netted off.
So from the moment you started then as governor, you were working towards figuring out what the further recapitalisations for Anglo would be?
Yeah.
Okay, so and did you have any idea at that time in September that, say, the recapitalisation that took place in March, I think it was 8.3 billion, with the possibility of a further 10 billion being invested, which was later, had you any idea it was going to be on that scale? You did?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I came to before I was appointed, I came to a committee here in the building, and I said, I think the range of uncertainty is very wide, about 50 billion wide. So it could have been like 45 billion or something like that as the total net costs of the product. When I came in, there were some calculations that had been done on the basis of but extrapolating into the rest of the portfolio, I remember saying quite clearly, I think it was my first meeting of the Central Bank Board, I said, this looks like a 25 to 30 billion euro problem. It turned out to be a 40 billion euro problem. So
December of 2009,
yeah.
That meeting with the board.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it didn't surprise me. What surprises, there were, range of uncertainty was very wide, so there were disappointments. The surprise, I think, came in. We already knew that AIB was the weaker of the two big banks, but the extent to which it was weaker surprised on the downside, and particularly after about October 2010, then subsequently confirmed when we did the analysis later on. So that was the biggest surprise. The scale of Anglo losses were, pretty clear they were going to be that big.
Advice to government then from September was always that this money has to be put into Anglo, but there was no other possibility or no other mechanism that could be used.
The guarantee was there. Yeah.
So that money had to be given. And in terms then of the promissory note and that arrangement, that structure, where did that come from? Whose idea was that?
The exact design, so let me see if I can remember the word. So in order to achieve this capitalization, you needed to put in an asset into AIB, into Anglo, which was worth something. And this something was a calculation that was made. But I certainly suggested that a government obligation of some form be put in. I was thinking in terms of a conventional bond, But several other people, especially in the Department of Finance and colleagues in the Central Bank, started to look at other advantages. If you put an asset that was an eligible asset for normal ECB monetary policy lending, then they could use it as collateral, and they wouldn't have to use ELA. They were already using ELA from February or March, I think, of 2009. So that would have been an advantage. Perhaps the obligation, if it was structured in a certain way, would not appear as one of the liabilities of the state in the general government debt. That was another objective. There was a third objective which I can't remember. So there were three. I mentioned three of four. In the end, I think it only satisfied the capitalisation. That it did end up on the government's debt, and it was not eligible for ECB monetary policy purposes, despite ingenious attempts to make it satisfy.
Honohan, an advisor to Minister Lenihan, has implied in his writings that it was the intention of the government to renegotiate the promissory notes at a later stage when they were entered into.
Well, I'm glad he didn't say that to me, because that would have put me in a very awkward position. You say, "Oh, this is a great asset of the bank, but they're not actually going to pay." So that would not have put me in a good position.
You've been involved in those conversations, then?
Well, I'd have to be accepting this as collateral for ELA, and the government. If one side of the government was saying to me, this stuff, that's a joke, we're never going to pay that stuff, then I couldn't accept it as collateral, could I? I'm in the bank.
Okay, but it's the case, though, that's what the government was thinking at the time.
I know.
But if it is the case, were they incorrect? I mean, was it disingenuous on their part then to put forward that structure to you?
I never interpreted that note as not having a full obligation as the Minister for Finance. It says so on it. That's what's written.
Okay.
And the Minister never suggested to me that he wasn't going to pay it.
Okay, thank you. Moving forward then to March 2010, and Anglo records, I think, the largest corporate loss in Irish history for the recapitalisations for Anglo, for other banks. And you say that from mid-April 2010, you could see the need that Ireland might need a bailout. You had a conversation with Minister Lenihan, who was at a Eurozone meeting, and you said to him, "We might be next to need a bailout."
Yes, I remember it clearly. I was in France at a conference, coming back from a conference, and because I remember. So sometimes you remember these telephone calls because they're in vivid places. So I remember him saying that. He said, "Will we? Do you think it's a good idea? I have to ask you." He'd like to be very formal, but I have to ask you your advice on whether we should go ahead and support and put Irish money into this Greek program that's being envisaged. So I think it was the 10th of April. And I said, "I think you should." And he said, "Yes," he said, "I have the same view, because, we're going to make money on it, because we're borrowing at this and we're going to get this amount of money." I said, "That's not the reason." I said, "The reason is we could be next." "Oh, no," he said. No. I've been talking to the people in Brussels, and they say Portugal is next."
So were you surprised at that response?
No. He didn't was surprised. No, I was worried, because Ireland was being held out because of the excellent, I have to say, well-organised fiscal response engineered by the minister and by the government, to a prompt response to the looming fiscal crisis and the actions that were taken I think in the summer of 2008, and then also in the early budget, brought forward budget in October 2008. Ireland was being praised in Europe as having been ahead of the curve, taking the corrective actions early on. But what I was beginning to be conscious of was that it might not be enough, and particularly with these bank losses, it was not. We were in a delicate situation, and he was being, as other ministers were, they were being praised in Brussels for having come out of everything, and it wasn't. We weren't out of everything.
The minister and the department see the difficulties that you foresaw. Or were they blind to them? Did they not want to?
No, they were not blind to them, because, in fact, and I remember around these times of the capitalisation, the PCAR discussions, how much money are the banks going to need? Various calculations being made. They were shifting from day to day, and the finance officials, most of whom you're talking to, they're saying this will sink the state. This sort of, they wouldn't have used that phrase, but they were very, very worried about the billions that were going to be required for the banks.
This is in April 2010.
In March.
In March.
Yeah,
Okay.
when we were heading towards that announcement, which was a very big announcement, overshadowed by the Greek crisis. Journalists came to me and I said, in the autumn, they said, what are you doing about your banks? And I said, well, we recapitalised them. Oh, I never noticed that. I was busy in Greece. And so that very big recapitalisation, which is by far the biggest recapitalisation, it was noticed here. There were, big television programs about Black Day for Ireland and all that sort of stuff. But
So they're looking at the banks and saying this will sink the state. Are they talking, after that recapitalisation is made, there's still a worry there about the banking system?
we're less worried than some of the earlier numbers that we were coming out. Then we discovered, anyway, some of the earlier numbers that were coming out in rough drafts were bigger than we ended up with, a little bit bigger.
Then if we look at May 2010, the IMF head here in Ireland speaks to you about a precautionary line of credit for the country. You raised this with you say Marion Street in your writing, but I wasn't clear. Marion Street is the Department of Finance.
Yeah. So this is another interesting phone call which I took in Heathrow Airport, in the place that you used to go down in the tube to the plane. So I got a call from Ashok Modi, who we know, who subsequently came here, and he was out of the blue. He said, we're coming. We're coming later in the month for the Article 4, yes, I know. And we're just wondering, do you think Ireland would be interested in one of these precautionary programs? And I knew that there are a number of two particular precautionary programs. I'm not sure which one he was talking about. One of them was for countries that were really considered very well run, very well managed, but just vulnerable to pressure from the market. Mexico, I think, qualified for one of these, and I may have taken one of these ones. And I thought, this might be quite good. We'd get a seed of approval, a potential access to money, and it might be good. But I didn't think it as a wonderful thing, which would have really been, let's go for that, because if I had, we would have been advocating it as well. I don't recall, perhaps you can tell me that I say in that paper that I actually spoke to the Department of Finance, or did they speak to me? I think he went on and raised it at the Department of Finance, and somebody mentioned to me, were you talking to Modi about this? Oh, it's not going to happen. No, something like that.
You said, although storm clouds were still only on the horizon, I could see some advantages, but was quickly put in my place by Marion Street officials.
Yeah, I don't think I called them. I think it came up in conversation with them. Were you talking to Modi about this? Oh, yeah, I was. Oh, it's not going to happen. Oh, no, they won't go do that.
And that was the Department of Finance when you say Marion Street?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Who was it? I don't know. Was it Kevin? Kevin says he can't remember. So there could have been. I don't want to drag people in.
Advocated for it.
No.
Never progressed.
I said to Modi, try it. I think it might be a good idea.
Okay. Sorry, you said to Modi.
Modi. I said to Modi, try it. They might not like it, but I think it might be a good idea. But it's not. It wasn't.
It didn't go anywhere.
For me, it didn't go anywhere.
No. Okay. Then looking again at the bank funding cliff in September, which you mentioned in your opening remarks, you say that you got on to the ECB at the end of July 2010 to make them fully aware of how the dependency on ELA was shaping up. But it's not until September that Mr. Trichet contacts Minister Honohan, demanding to know what Ireland was doing about the position and looking for a team to go to Dublin.
Yeah.
So what happened between July and September, if this was so serious?
Yeah, it is a bit funny. So I wrote at the end of July, and I fully expected then in August, early meeting, to be pulled aside. And what do you mean to say this? This is how do you, dead silence, which I took as this is good news. They must have figured this out themselves. This is no surprise in my letter. So I wrote another letter in August. I shouldn't really go into a lot of detail about communications within the Eurosystem. To some extent, I'm writing on behalf of Ireland, of course, which is what allows me to talk about them at all. So I provided full information at the end of August again. Then, of course, I did get the response. The concern and the anxiety was starting to build there.
Thank you, Joe. The dead silence then, and you said you thought that meant good that they know what's happening, but you don't think they did understand the situation? I'm not sure whether they may have just felt, well, it's very good for them to keep us informed about these things, but it seems to be nothing very serious. And of course, then in the course of August, a number of things happened
to raise the temperature quite a lot. There was the third tranche of, well, I can't remember when that was announced, but I suddenly became aware of the third tranche of NAMA losses, and then there was downgrading of S&P. So it wasn't by S&P. So it wasn't surprising that at the beginning of September, it wasn't just any communication from me that had the ECB starting to really get worried about the trend in ELA, because it wasn't clear how this would be reduced. The money was flowing out, and how would it flow back in?
Okay, and did Mr. Trichet have the power in September, the authority, to call the Minister for Finance here and say, we're sending a team from the Commission, you have to do something about this?
No, that wouldn't be his style or his power at all. But he would be more inclined to say, to talk to Brussels, and the Brussels would say, we have the excessive deficit procedure, we want to look and see how the public finances are going, and then I'm sure Jean-Claude Trichet would have said to Brian Lennon, the situation seems to be very bad, I think you should look at it, and people in Brussels will help, we can help. So it would be that kind of thing. It wouldn't be a kind, here we are, with, as you sort of imply, here we are to mandate some things at you. It is a collegial environment, though, as Kevin Cardiff has pointed out, behind the collegiality there are red lines and...
Sorry, you're satisfied that the department was fully aware?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, what I would say is that in July, if I go back to July, not about just the banks, but on the fiscal situation, our economists in the central bank alerted me in the middle of July. They said that the fiscal situation is badly wrong. And I said, well, I know it's not going to be. But no, it's worse than you think. So the sums out, and I had concerns then that maybe finance weren't sharing the view that we had at the central bank, that the fiscal situation, banks aside, was going to go off track. And I got my colleagues to speak. I said, I'm not going to write a formal letter to the minister, but you make it clear at the official level that our position on this, and we continued that dialogue. And eventually, at the end of August, I remember talking to Brian Lennon and saying to him, your debt ratio is going to be 100% of GDP at the end of the year. Oh no, he says, no, you're wrong. It's like that. So there may have been some differences on the overall fiscal, but not on the banking situation. Full sharing.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a difference of analysis, not a lack of communication.
Yeah. The domestic standing group fell into abeyance just prior to the crisis really reaching its peak in September in terms of the guarantee, the DSG.
Well, yeah. In September, which year are we talking about now?
2008.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I don't really know about that. What I understand about the DSG is it met at a certain level, but they weren't the deciders, and now it meets the decider level. So it's quite different. It's just
The Financial Sector Stability Group. I was just curious about that. Replace the DSG? Is that something different?
What we have now, we meet as the principals. Why do we call them the principals? Because when the Troika were here, there were meetings at a technical level, and then people say, there's a principals meeting. And then we would say, yeah, but we want to have a meeting before that. It'll be the domestic principals. So it'll be 5 or 6 of the senior people. And we still call it the principals, and I pointed out that this is actually the domestic standing group, which we have to have, and we meet on a monthly basis.
Membership is, who are the principals? It's Central Bank?
Me from the Central Bank with my 2 deputies, Derek Moran from the Department of Finance with his second secretary and a couple of assistant secretaries, and the NTMA, Conor O'Kelly, and his number 2. So it's basically that.
Is it a decision-making forum, or is it just a discussion?
Oh, no, when I say it's the deciders, for each the deciders in our individual institution. So that's very important. It has no collective decision-making power. Obviously, the Secretary General is answerable to the Minister. So we share views, and we say, why don't you do this? Okay, but I'll do it under my own authority. We don't actually, it's not a unitary decision-making body, no.
And just to confirm or to clarify, this new structure came in, or this new arrangement came in when? This meeting of principals?
When I think we started to meet on a more regular basis with proper minuting and proper preset agendas as soon as the first Troika mission had gone. We said we've got to do this on a more organised basis. But before that's just at the beginning of 2011. But in the course of 2010, we were in constant session, if you like. We weren't having regular meetings because we were having meetings semi-continuously. So it wasn't as if there was a breakdown of communications at all, except with one little exception on a certain date, which may come up in the discussion later, where there was people got left out of the loop.
And this group then is kind of cross between the DSG and what will become the FSSG. Was it ever involved in discussions? We spoke with Mr. Cardiff yesterday about possible preparatory work in case Ireland was to find itself outside of the euro. A unit preparing papers, scoping papers. Was it ever involved in that work? Were you aware of that work?
Okay, so look, there's a lot of contingency work going on, but any contingency work on any matters were not minuted in or discussed in that forum. They were taken offline in different ways. There's a lot of technical work on different contingencies, lots and lots of contingencies were done in each of the agencies, and there was a lot of sharing of information. But most of that work, obviously, is technical work and doesn't happen to be
aware that the contingency was being looked at in the department.
Lots of contingencies were being looked at in my entity and in others, and there was a sufficient linkage between all of the contingency work that I'm aware of. They may have been doing other contingency work that I wasn't aware of, but I'm aware of various contingency actions, but I'm not saying what those contingencies were about because I'm trying to be forthcoming in my response to you. But if you're saying there's contingency about this and that, I'm not.
Okay, as it happens, I'm running out of time, so I have to move to my next question. But on dividends, because we had this in evidence from Mr. Neary when he was in with us previously. In 2008, 1.2 billion in dividends was paid out to shareholders by the Irish banks. Banks that would be guaranteed in September, and so that liability effectively came onto the taxpayer. Did the financial regulator have the power in 2008 to stop the banks paying out dividends?
Oh, I believe so, yeah.
Why would the domestic standing group be discussing the possibility of legislation that would give that power to the regulator in 2008 if you already had it?
I suppose we're back to some extent to what I was saying to Deputy Doherty.
I want to specify
do we really have the power? An example of one thing that we don't have the power to do, it seems, according to all the lawyers, and we might want to do, which is close to the area of dividends, is we don't have the power to oblige the banks to change their loan loss provisioning, because that's a matter for their judgment and the approval of their auditors. I think we probably have that implicit power, but the lawyers say, no, you don't have that power. Now, that's very close to that territory of saying, okay, if you're saying that you can't pay dividends, why can we not pay dividends? You can't pay dividends because you don't have enough capital. We do have enough capital. We're showing 15% capital, or whatever number they were showing. But you shouldn't be showing 15% capital because you haven't made enough loan loss provisions. Loan loss provisions are a matter for us, not a matter for you, the regulator. So I believe they did have the power, but I suppose there'll be some lawyers who say you don't.
Okay. Just the final area I want to look at.
I don't think they tried, though, very, very hard to get them to stop paying dividends. Because I think they in some of the papers in 2008, I believe, or 2007, 2008, I think that I saw in some papers that the idea that it wouldn't weaken the banks in the stock market if they. So it would be a bad signal. So it would be better to pay out. And companies sometimes pay out dividends when they haven't made any profits in order to achieve stability. But given what happened subsequently, it does seem like a mistake to have allowed them.
And you're not aware of Mr. Neary making an effort to try to stop them to pay out dividends?
I don't want to dispute his evidence. I didn't see whether he said that.
He said he didn't have the power, but he didn't. Right. Yeah. Okay. Next, my final question is in relation to aggregate debtor concentrations across the banking sector, because the central bank didn't pick up on these prior to the crisis. So was this due to information deficiencies in the central bank's management information centre? Is it due to a lack of regular monitoring? And do you now have the systems in place so that you can pick up on these large exposures, these debtor connections?
I think it was a consequence of not looking at the bank risks in a quantitative way. and doing the analytics on where the risks lay, concentration instead on the governance structures, which are important. So they just didn't look at those kinds of numerical things until the end of 2007, when they discovered all these crossovers. We've introduced a credit register. You have legislated for it, and it's being constructed now. There's a firm doing all the software. So over time, that will build up not just for the big debtors, a comprehensive picture of all of the indebtedness of borrowers of any reasonable scale. But for the big borrowers, the ability was there to do it. They were known. That's how they did this big study in saying, let's take the 5 biggest property developers and let's go to the biggest banks and see how much they owe each other. That's an extraordinary. I never saw anything like that in any other country. The lack of information. And the banks did not want there to be a credit register in this country because the big banks thought we have a lot of information about the market. If a credit registry is created, everybody else will have that information. So in a concentrated banking market, it's one of the evils of a concentrated banking market is that the main players don't want to reveal the information.
Just on that 5x5 data connections, which you wrote about. Thank you, Chair. You wrote about in your report, in the Honohan report, and you talked about the high-level priorities and the medium-level priorities. And one of the medium-level priorities that was found out was that in one of the banks, they didn't realise that one of their debtors' exposures to another bank was worth more than $1 billion. They had it at a couple of $100 million, but it was more than $1 billion. And that the importance of this didn't seem to be understood by the regulatory system.
Yes.
Can that happen again? Could such a thing happen today?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. It's a kind of the situation we're in at present with the Irish banks. It just doesn't arise. They aren't making those big loans. But with the systems that we have in place and the expectation of drilling down on analytical work, looking to see where are the profits coming from, what's the business model, who are they lending to, what are the magnitudes involved, what are the biggest, all of that information is being assembled. So that lack of information couldn't arise.
Thank you, Jerry.